All right, so we got Andrew and Christian here hanging out, talking about some Marvel movies.
Hey.
Specifically, we got the question I found on the internet the other day. I thought it was pretty interesting. Did Marvel Studios ruin superhero films? Specifically, Marvel Studios being the MCU, beginning in 2008, all the way up to now, with the latest release of Shang-Chi in the theaters a few weeks ago.
Sucked.
Well, we'll get into that, I guess. But I mean, let's just jump right into it. I think the important thing to start with is that while the MCU is largely credited with popularizing superhero movies, they certainly didn't begin the trend of superhero movies. They go all the way back to Batman 1966 with Adam West, even a little bit before that with short films, TV pilots, serial films. Marvel didn't really get into it until about 1986 with Howard the Duck, which is a conversation for a whole nother day. But after then, you had things maybe like Daredevil in 2003-ish. Have you ever seen Daredevil?
I have not. No.
No. I just got the DVD today,
not,
actually.
I'm not as, I guess, Marvel literate as you are, I would say. I got into the game much later. You know, of course, I've seen the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, which was just awesome. I mean, everyone's seen that. Loved those movies as a kid, but never really got into the MCU, I'd say, probably up until Winter Soldier I remember watching, and then I went back and seen, different parts of Iron Man. But, I think after Winter Soldier started watching a lot of the other movies sort of as they come out. And, it wasn't until Infinity War was coming out where you really stressed to me that it was important to go back and watch all the movies.
I wouldn't go see it with you until you did.
Yeah, and I'm glad I did that because, obviously, I missed a lot of those films, and that all those movies is what that was leading up to with that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those movies were really good. But I think the point of this episode is to kind of talk about how maybe independently they're not all great because they all kind of build off one another.
The films in the MCU.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I agree. I think that if you look at pre-MCU. Well, not even before the MCU. It partially during. There are a lot of quote-unquote solo superhero films like the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. Of course, there are sequels, but, I mean, you don't have Superman flying around in the Dark Knight. You have Spider-Man, the Sam Raimi and the Amazing Spider-Man. You have the Christopher Reeve Superman films. You have the Tim Burton Batman. Even something not DC or Marvel like Hellboy with Ron Perlman. I believe they're directed by Guillermo del Toro, which the first one's fantastic. But those are very unique by today's standards in that they don't contribute to a massive universe. And maybe the solo film aspect shared its style in that kind of film in that it allowed for the filmmakers to have a little bit more, let's say, creative freedom with their narratives.
Right. I think all those films kind of for their own sole universes, if that makes sense. Like with the X-Men movies, especially.
X-Men 2, yep.
They're not really worrying about the expanded universe rather than just their own concrete universe with their characters that they've introduced. And, so it kind of, a lot of those movies, I think since the MCU, they've kind of got, pushed to the wayside and viewed not as great as all the movies in the MCU because, again, just what it built up towards was great. And just, I think, from, casting decisions to just stories, you could obviously definitely make the argument most movies in the MCU are much better than a lot of those other sequels to the original, movies, but besides Spider-Man, I think all three, the third one has its issues, but
Sam Raimi.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's sort of, I think the third one I always say is kind of aged like fine wine, sort of not to go off topic, but sort of like the Star Wars prequels. I mean, now that the new trilogy has come out, I think people have a lot more respect for the prequels because of what they were trying to do, at least where, the new trilogy just, it clearly was, two different directors having two different ideas on where they should take it. But
I see what you're saying.
That's a, conversation for another day.
I see what you're saying. So, like I said earlier, and I want to know kind of what you think about this too, but the solo films presenting some sort of originality. So, for example, something like Christopher Nolan Batman movies, which I know are films that you and I both absolutely adore. Some people we know don't, but we won't mention those people. I think that maybe because, and I might be stretching it here, but maybe because Christopher Nolan doesn't have to worry about where he's going to fit in Superman or the Daily Planet or Wonder Woman or Themyscira, that he has more of a distinct focus on the character of Batman and maybe the character of the Joker or Bane or whatever villains he wants to use. Whereas if, say, the MCU makes a Spider-Man movie, not only do they have to focus on Spider-Man, but they also have to focus on, say, Iron Man and the implications that Iron Man leaves on the rest of the world.
Right.
So I don't know if maybe that's part of it. And again, like this whole thing is not just trash on the MCU hour. I know myself and Christian both love Marvel movies, and we'll go see them in the theaters no matter what. We'll talk about them all the time. We genuinely love Marvel movies. Just I saw this question and I thought it was a really great question to discuss. But sorry for that tangent. Yeah, what do you think about the solo films versus connected narratives?
I mean, like I said, I think with the solo films, they just have to worry about, and you touched on this, but they just have to worry about focusing on one singular superhero in their own universe. And I think it's where, you could make the argument too, like the Iron Man trilogy, you can look at that as a separate entity, but it's still connected, and they kind of, not to their fault, but they made it so with, especially the end credit scenes, they always build towards the next movie and introduce other characters and have dialogues or even other scenes, like in it was Thor Ragnarok. There was a scene with Doctor Strange, and so it's like you're worrying about all the other.
Was it Thor Ragnarok?
I think it was Thor Ragnarok when the Doctor Strange scene. When
I remember the scene because he was wearing his gloves.
Yeah, it's definitely in Thor Ragnarok because I sort of watched that recently. But, I think if you're looking at it like sequel-wise, I think the MCU's done a much better job than a lot of the other solo films, like especially X-Men. I mean, X-Men, you've had some, good movies, and you've had some absolute dog shit ones that some of them I couldn't even get through, seriously.
New Mutants.
Yeah, it's just brutal. That was brutal. But no, I think that's a very, good question, and it's kind of, I guess, an opinionated one too. Like, you can look at the MCU movies, I guess, as their own films and their own sequels, trilogies, whatnot. But with the solo films, it's just they don't have to rely on other characters in the MCU, say, to impact their own movie, and they can just focus on whatever the directives, creative mind for, say, like with Raimi. He knew exactly what type of Spider-Man Peter Parker he wanted.
That's right.
Didn't have to, worry about any other outside influences and stuff. And seriously, up until the third one, when Sony came in and said, no, Venom is in your movie, it kind of really soured that movie, because that other storyline was pretty good.
Yeah,
but
Venom wasn't meant to be in it.
You could tell the third Spider-Man was not what he wanted. It was a different vibe.
Right.
Had a lot more Bully Maguire moments, which was fantastic. Yeah. But it was definitely the weakest of the three.
So let's look at it this way, right? Or let's think about it this way, right? If we're saying that solo superhero movies are what allow for the most creativity, originality, and uniqueness, then if you look at that in the MCU, what if we look at something like Iron Man, very first one, zero expectations from the audience going into it, as far as I know. I mean, I don't remember exactly, but then you have something like maybe Captain America. Like, sure, it's connected to the universe, but it's so far detached from what had come out already in that it takes place in the 1940s rather than right up with Iron Man, that again, you have this distinct solo story that maybe only connects to the greater universe at the end of the film, maybe end credit scene that gets you going. Similarly, not only in the early days, maybe something like Guardians of the Galaxy, which I think is a fantastic movie. I love James Gunn. I love the cast. But it's so greatly disconnected at that point in time. Now, not so much, but it's so greatly disconnected that you have that same feel of a solo story. And I mean, I think honestly, Guardians of the Galaxy is one of the most unique Marvel movies out there.
For sure. It to its credit or to its dismay, it did introduce that theme of bringing maybe necessary and unnecessary humor into the Marvel movies. But
that too.
It worked in Guardians, where in Avengers, like I don't need like all these jokes about whatever. Like I want to focus on the story, especially bringing in Thanos and stuff. Again, there's some really funny and humorous moments, but I think it could, less would be more in a lot of those, following films after Guardians. But yeah, totally, you can see the uniqueness compared to what came before Guardians. Really just literally expanding on the universe and, bringing in so many different other elements, characters, kind of connecting the dots to Thanos through Guardians was great. But yeah, it's kind of, I wanted to touch on something you said earlier about Iron Man. Yeah, you can look at it, on one hand you can say they wanted to just make a solo Iron Man movie, but at the end, correct me if I'm wrong, but they introduced the Avengers, so it's like clearly
I think they had a scene with Nick Fury.
Yeah, they had an idea of making an Avengers movie or making other Avenger character films, so they were already building towards something.
All their eggs were in
one
one basket.
So they really weren't focusing just on Iron Man, and I don't think that was a bad thing, but
no, not necessarily.
I think from a director standpoint, you don't have as much creative freedom as you do, because they're not really the ones pulling all the strings. It was the people at the time in Marvel Studios that knew what they wanted to build towards.
Yeah, and later on Disney as well.
Disney when they took over, right?
2009.
Yeah, so that was like literally the year after.
Bought Marvel for about $4 billion. I'd say it's a pretty good investment considering at the time right now they've grossed about $23 billion worldwide box office, which is just an absolutely insane number to think about.
Yeah.
One thing that I think we're moving towards intentionally, unintentionally, is the use of comedy in Marvel movies. And when I first heard this question, the comedic factor of Marvel films is the first thing my mind went to. And that when we go see movies together in the theaters, Marvel movies specifically, if somebody says a dumb one-liner, I sigh and say, why am I here?
I can just feel your reaction. I thought even looking at
especially in Black Widow, right? You remember in Black Widow, there was that scene with Natasha and Yelena. They were in some sort of convenience store equivalent, whatever it was. And there was this great, possibly one of the best scenes in the movie. It was a great interaction between Natasha and Yelena, talking about the things that Yelena had to go through in the Red Room after Natasha left. And it was so deeply emotional, and it was the character interactions and relationships were driving that scene right into the audience. And then Yelena, I don't even remember it, makes some stupid one-liner joke that wasn't even funny. And it just threw the scene. Exactly. It threw the credibility out the window.
Yeah.
And I think that you could say that, comedy is just a style of the MCU. It is. But, I mean, like I said, $23 billion.
That's just an example of, a very bad moment to use it and to not have that, written or dialogue in that part of the movie. They clearly knew what they were doing there.
But that's what the MCU is riddled with nowadays, is cheesy one-liners at the end of deeply emotional scenes. Again, in that movie, later on, when Red Guardian is talking to Yelena, they're having this really emotional father-daughter moment after Yelena runs off from the dinner table. They start singing American Pie. Great song. That's not the part I'm concerned about. The part I'm concerned about is right after that, where the army of Red Room soldiers comes out to attack the Red Guardian, and he says, I'm going to protect my daughter, and he stands strong, and it's going to be this, real great continuation of their relationship where he spends all of his energy protecting her while she, stays back or even fights with him. Sure, go for it. And what do? Do you remember what they do?
Just shoot him.
They shoot him with tranquilizer darts, and he falls down after he says, boy.
And then there's a long pause, and that long pause indicates it's like, basically you should say on screen, audience laugh now. And it just, again,
throwing a laugh track.
Kills the good moment.
Right.
And, that movie was riddled with that throughout. And I don't know when, I guess with that movie, because, that and Shang-Chi, in my opinion, were just complete dog shit. I mean, I was insanely disappointed. I mean, you remember, I was friggin' so excited to see Black Widow. As I said, it was friggin' 11 years too late. I mean, that movie was made solely on the fact that they saw how well Wonder Woman did, and they said, "Oh, we have a great female lead character. We should make a movie about her." Okay.
I think that's an entire conversation that could fill an hour, 2 hours.
Yeah, but you might see it differently. We kind of talked about this before we started, but I really think since after Endgame, there were a few moments in Homecoming where it just felt different. But I think
Far From Home.
Right, Far From Home. Sorry. I think it's sort of been on a downward trend, in my opinion. After that was a great movie, but had its moments. But I think Black Widow and Shang-Chi, like I said, just were not good movies. I don't know how they are so highly rated. I think she was insanely underutilized, throughout the film, and again, we still didn't even get, we barely got the Budapest scene, which was always hinted at and talked about. It was background, It was really like background noise in this one scene.
That's a good way to put it.
Seriously, and it's like, at least friggin' have that. And it's like, again, how it ends, is that end, like, this was another thing we always talk about, how even Shang-Chi ended, I guess, but now that they have all the shows that are out, which all three of them I really enjoyed, but it's like, they're still TV shows, so should they completely tie into the Marvel Cinematic Universe? I mean, I'm not sure, and it just seems like the end of that movie is gearing up towards what maybe will be in Hawkeye. I can't really see how they're gonna, unless they, make a spin-off Yelena movie or something, but
I wouldn't put it past them.
Yeah, I just was disappointed with that. And, Shang-Chi as well, again, had something so unique, and so, like, that bus scene to me was fucking incredible. It was so well shot. The fighting choreography was unbelievable. And you're like, wow, this is going to be like a ninja-style superhero film, and you're like, you could get on board with that, whether you like it or not. Then, clearly his father was the main villain, and it just, they went in a completely different direction, and it just, like we said,
within the last 10 minutes they went in that completely different direction,
like
which is their lack of commitment.
That movie to me seemed like the writers in the writing room, early stages of development, this movie just threw a bunch of ideas on the wall and just said, we'll fit them all in the movie. Who gives a shit about making a singular character-driven plot-based movie? And that's another trend I think like Black Widow had. Insanely well shot, had some gorgeous scenes and stuff. But
it did. Cinematography was very good.
And again, it's like they hyped up friggin' Taskmaster, who would have been an unbelievable villain to introduce into the MCU. You could do so much with him, and it just made zero sense. It was a cyborg robot from, I don't even remember the main villains because that's how pointless and how quickly I forgot about him.
It was Dreykov, I think his name was.
Yeah, and they just, again, there was so many like things that Black Widow, my biggest takeaway is just underutilized so many key points that they introduced.
Right.
And, and Shang-Chi even, like we said too, like some of the CGI scenes look beyond fake, and it just looked bad, and that's very unlike Marvel movies, and so, critics are friggin' clapping their hands how great this movie was, but to me it's like nobody's really said how like fake and off some of those CGI shots look, and that's something Marvel's never been faulted with.
So do you think it has to do with, because the way I think about it, and you could have a totally different opinion, but I think their downward trend not necessarily started post Guardians of the Galaxy. I think Guardians of the Galaxy 2014 is where Marvel really realized that they could take a relatively unknown license like Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, I will fully admit right now, 2013, 2014, I knew next to nothing about them. So I'm not saying that I'm the end-all be-all, just as an example. But they noticed that they could take that relatively unknown license and make it successful. And I'm not saying the way they did that was with comedic effect, because James Gunn is a comedic guy. I mean, if you've ever seen Super, his movie with Rainn Wilson, fun fact, Rob Zombie voices God. It's very funny. It's very satirical. Kevin Bacon's in it. I believe Liv Tyler.
He's the king of satire. I mean,
James Gunn?
I mean, he and he has, obviously he's a comedic driven director. No matter what movies he makes, no matter how serious they are, there's always going to be comedy. But he uses it so well, and it's not like overwhelming. Really, Guardians is supposed to be not taken as seriously as the other films. I mean, that
exactly
was my take on it.
So. Because Guardians of the Galaxy, the comedy that's worked into the script and the narrative, is because that's the character's personality.
Right, like Star-Lord's supposed to be goofy, and that's what makes him interesting and funny and very relatable for many people.
However, flash forward a couple of years with something like Thor Ragnarok. Again, I love Taika Waititi. What We Do in the Shadows is one of my all-time favorite comedies. Right. What We Do in the Shadows is incredible. Taika Waititi is an unbelievably funny guy. The problem that I find is that I don't think Thor is really supposed to be funny. So the serious nature that he had in something like Thor 1 and Thor the Dark World, granted Thor the Dark World wasn't the best, it's sort of undermined and erased and just swept under the rug in 2017's Thor Ragnarok, when all of a sudden he's just Star-Lord levels of comedic genius.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of trend that Marvel is following. And it again, you might just say like, well, that's Marvel's style, but it has affected other superhero movies in the past. I mean, I don't know if you heard or saw the discourse on Twitter a few months ago. I don't have Twitter, so I get it all from a secondhand source on the internet. But David Ayer's Suicide Squad. That movie, I loved it at first, not going to lie to you, was kind of a train wreck.
Right.
And
see, I hated it because the villain in it just did not do it for me.
Enchantress, yeah.
And
that was the case with a lot of people.
I'm sure she has some great stories in comics and stuff, but it was just really goofy, and I don't know, I did not care for it when I first saw it. And,
and this is kind of going to be a backhand towards the MCU, but partially if David Ayer is to be believed on Twitter, and I mean, he has released pages of the Suicide Squad 2016 script, which the original script that he's released does not fit what we saw in the movies for the most part. But what basically ended up happening, the short version, was that Batman vs. Superman came out in 2016, did not do as well financially as Warner Brothers had hoped, obviously. That was a hard R. That was very dark, serious undertones. Very, very, very minimal use of like one-liner jokes and cheesy characters and everything. And then Deadpool came out. I love Deadpool. You love Deadpool, right?
Of course, yeah.
Deadpool's fantastic. And that's not MCU. Don't hold me to that. It's not MCU, but it is a Marvel property. I understand Fox did it. We get it. However, that was a hard R. That was very funny. It was very comedic. Marvel had at this time already established a reputation of making basically superhero comedies. And Warner Brothers saw the trend. Batman vs. Superman, dark, serious, didn't make money. Deadpool, lighthearted, funny, made a lot of money. They said, make Suicide Squad a comedy. David Ayer said, my movie's not a comedy. And they said, we don't care. And they did it anyway. And look what a train wreck it came out to be. Pushing forward a few more years, 2021, James Gunn's Suicide Squad. I love that movie. I think that movie is fantastic.
It's way better. Way
better
than the predecessor.
However, it's the same deal with Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yep.
The characters are not forced into this comedic role. Peacemaker, for example, has that air to him of...
he's sort of, I guess, for lack of a better term, the comedic lead.
Right. Of the movie. He's dense. He is dense. He does not understand when people are being sarcastic. He says, I'll kill as many women and children as I have to get peace. When clearly, Bloodshot just said that as a joke. Peacemaker doesn't get that, but he really, towards the end of the movie, he really gets serious about it. And he drops that comedy when he has to. Again, that's I think attributed to James Gunn and his natural prowess for making comedic films.
Now you're talking about it, I wonder if he sort of mirrored him in a way to Drax, because Drax is a literal character, and that's what makes him so funny.
You're right.
Because he takes everything insanely literal, and
it just
works.
I never thought of that. You're right.
It just works. So, you kind of, because Peacemaker was literally like that too. He's insane, literally literal throughout the movie, and that's what made him funny. But yeah, I just think he knows what he's doing, and I think the studios knows what he's doing, so they give him a lot of leeway.
Yeah, I think he had a little bit of a longer leash on this one.
Name a studio that gets their hands dirty more than Warner Brothers. Seriously.
Not in a good way.
Their movies. Like, what they want in their movie, they get. Doesn't matter. So it's like the director has little to no power, which is, again, not to try to get off tangent to what we're talking about, but something I've always said to you. I think maybe the funding's not there, or the revenue's not there, whatever, but I seriously think if DC could have its own studios. I know Warner Brothers owns all their rights, so that they would never do that because they would lose billions in profit. Mm-hmm. But I think you would see a similar success to the MCU, because you'd have it would just be just open the doors for way more creativity. And I think Warner Brothers has really hampered that, because you could kind of see with the start of Man of Steel, they were trying to start and build a universe, and for various reasons, it kind of got stopped. But I know they've come up with amazing storylines and film trilogies, film universes. Obviously, like, they've done a really good job with Harry Potter. I know you haven't seen them, don't really care for them, but I just think with DC, it's like they always got to get involved, and I just think that kills all creativity.
Yeah, I think I disagree with you a little bit. And this kind of brings it back on track too, in that you were saying, if DC had their own studios like Marvel does, you got Warner Brothers as the parent, Disney as the parent, MCU, DCU, whatever.
Go play, basically.
Right. If DC had their own studios, I don't necessarily think that would alter their success or failure rate too much. Mostly because I think modern audiences of films, specifically superhero films, have been so tethered to they've been conditioned to see Marvel movies.
Right.
So they've been conditioned to
That's
see
who they're
this.
marketing to.
Exactly. So they've been conditioned to see these funny characters make, haha, Thanos is going to destroy the universe, but we can still make a joke. Whereas when you get something like Zack Snyder's Justice League, I know you haven't seen it yet. It's 4 hours, big commitment. I saw it day of release because you bet I was there.
Even the original, again, the topic from the day, I liked the original Justice League when I saw it, so I know because I like Snyder's kind of, I guess, dark side on these superheroes. I love that. I will probably like it way more. Again, clearly Justice League had its issues again because Warner Brothers got involved.
Well, we'll save Justice League for another day because that's a conversation in and of itself. But like I was saying, Zack Snyder's Justice League. It's very dark. It's very serious. It's very deep undertones in terms of the superhero narratives. It really, and I know I'm with very, very few people here on this hill, and it's a hill that I'm willing to die on. But Zack Snyder's vision of his characters and the films really, really get into the mindset of a superhero and being a superhero, whether it be, millionaire Bruce Wayne or broke college kid with 3 jobs, Barry Allen. Every single person in that movie, and in Batman vs. Superman to an extent, has a flushed out, to me at least, has a flushed out arc of character development and motives. But I think in the MCU, they're really departing from that. So something like Iron Man 2008, right? Like, that was great. That was getting into Iron Man. It was, figuring out what makes him work. Something like Captain America, even Captain America 2, which you and I both agree, I think, is one of, if not the best film of the MCU.
I think my favorite movie, by far, of the MCU.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mine too, definitely. But those movies really get into the characters of Captain America 2. Not even just Captain America. You get into Bucky a little bit. You get into Black Widow, a little bit into Nick Fury. And it's fantastic character storytelling.
Shield,
Right. But more recently, you have films like Captain Marvel that, to me, did nothing for the character. It was basically point A to point A. I don't think the film went anywhere.
Another movie that I think fell to cultural issues going on and, getting more, female leads in these superhero movies involved. And again, it kind of started with Wonder Woman, how successful that was.
Which
like,
Wonder Woman has its issues, I think, but again, that's a very deeply character-driven film.
I just think, Captain Marvel, again, was a movie that was made a little too late, and I think also, I don't know why, but I have the feeling, too, it's like they thought, they knew what was coming with Thanos, and they thought she would, like, even the playing field, if that makes sense. Because,
that's a possibility.
She's, like, insanely freaking OP compared to the rest of the characters, and it's like, still she can't, like, defeat Thanos, but it's just like, I don't know, I really felt that was those were the two main reasons why that movie was made. And, had its moments, but again, just, like, I just think was made, like, again with Black Widow, I just think both those movies were made for all the wrong reasons, where they should have been films that were made even well before and fit into the MCU well before and establish their characters and fit them in with the other Avengers. And like I don't know, that's just kind of how I felt about that. And right before, what was it? Like, did that come out between Infinity War and Endgame?
Captain Marvel.
Yeah. So
it was right before Endgame.
Thrown into because the end of Infinity War had that end credit with.
That's right.
I think back to what I think the discussion of our first episode is with. Solo, like, the solo movies have more creativity than the MCU movies. Like,
but not all of them.
Not all of them. But if Captain Marvel was made even 5 years before, say, you think that it would have been a better film because it would have been focusing more on the character and be more independent rather than just trying to fit in with the movies that came before it and what was to come after it. Again, I just think she was thrown in there, made to even the playing field.
I think so.
I don't think Endgame would have been any better or worse if she wasn't there.
Although the interesting point about that, now that I think about it, is I'm almost positive that Brie Larson's first outing as Captain Marvel was filming Endgame. I think they filmed Endgame before Captain Marvel. That's not to say that they didn't have the narratives in place already.
Infinity War and Endgame were shot, I'm pretty sure, at the same time.
You're right, they were. I remember Scarlett Johansson saying something like that in an interview. But I mean, it doesn't just stop at Captain Marvel. There are other films that I think that really exemplify the lack of character storytelling, and I know I'm going to get berated for this one, but I think one of them is Civil War. It's one of the most highly regarded Marvel films in the MCU.
Again, one of my favorite fight scenes at the end.
Yeah,
him and Bucky,
of course.
Cap. It was,
especially that recreation of the cover of the Civil War comic.
Right.
That alone, to me, was fantastic.
But having both read the comic, I think, in seeing the movie, the comic is by far superior and makes way more sense story-wise.
As it is with most
right. The books,
adaptations.
They always say the book's always better than the film,
Right.
Which, I can't really fully relate because I'm not an avid reader, but nonetheless, I just think Civil War again suffered from what other Marvel movies at that time suffered from, which was a very poor villain.
Civil War?
Yes.
You didn't like Baron Zemo?
I liked him, but I didn't like how he was the sole cause of splitting up the Avengers. Okay. You might have a different reasoning why you don't like Civil War, but that was mine. I hated that it was just him that teared apart, the Avengers.
I thought Civil War, a big problem with it when I initially saw it was that it was pure spectacle. There was no reason, there was no legitimate narrative reason why this needed to be a thing. I mean, I get it, right? Like, Sokovia bombed back into the planet. A lot of people died, but a lot of people were saved in Age of Ultron. But honestly, this part of the MCU is trying to deal with some sort of, real world implications of superheroes, which to me, they didn't really tackle, because I understand that these heroes would need to be kept in line because they have extraordinary abilities. But if you keep the heroes in line, who's going to keep the villains in line? Right. And you have to suspend some sort of disbelief when you see a comic book movie, because it's just that, right? It's a comic book. Like, comic books are flashy. They're most of the time written for children.
Serious.
Exactly. So you need to understand that, if Thor is, a government agent now, and say Loki and his army of Chitauri come down and invade some country that the U.S. doesn't agree with right now. It just doesn't make sense.
Right, and I think, too, that's why narratively Thor and Hulk were kept out of the movie. Because I think that was sort of maybe I'll give them credit for that, a smart play, because you can't control both of them. Granted, you really can't control a lot of them. I get the reasoning behind the Accords, but I was always Team Cap. I just think they're all selfless and do what's best for the world, and always the biggest dilemma of superheroes is you can't save everybody.
Exactly.
So it's like, even if they were kept in check, like you said, it's like it's not going to be stopping the villains. And then who's to say some villain that is related to the Avengers causing issues in another country, now that they're controlled by these Accords, they may be like, who cares? Ross. Let them go. Screw. Like, it's none of our business. But I think the Avengers are clearly a private enterprise, and that's what makes them the best. And looking back now, I have, further issue with Civil War, because I don't really think it added anything to, Avengers 3 and 4.
It didn't. That's exactly what I was going to say next. It's 100% only a 2-hour plot device in order to split up the Avengers, so Thanos in Infinity War has an easier time beating the crap out of them.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Thanos do that, but again, people behind the scenes and the writers...
Well, obviously he didn't know that, but if it wasn't for Civil War, then...
The writers at the time of Civil War, I think, knew what they were trying to do, was split up the Avengers. They knew they were building towards Thanos.
Right, if it wasn't for Civil War, it's totally feasible that Captain America and Iron Man, who are still buddies now because Civil War never happened, are both in Wakanda protecting Vision, and maybe they could have stopped Thanos in Wakanda. Then it wouldn't have had to be, half on Titan, half on Wakanda. Yeah. Which, as a story-selling standpoint, in Infinity War, splitting them up like that is fantastic. Because, one, you get to exemplify more characters. And two, you get to see different perspectives on the fight of Thanos. It also helps exemplify Thanos' character, because you have the very emotional side on Titan when, after he throws Gamora off the cliff and he has, Mantis on his head and he's talking about that. That's great. But you also have it in Wakanda, where he just comes in and he mows down the Avengers with his Infinity Stones. You get that great scene with all the, what are they called? The unwanted, the unbroken, the dog-looking things. Yeah, I forget what they're called. But they're running in. You get that big fight in Wakanda, and sure, it would have been cool to see Iron Man flying around there with the blasters and everything.
Right, but I hate that argument. Who's to say that Iron Man still wouldn't have been on that ship? I mean, they're all in New York, like. You know what I mean?
Right. I'm not saying it's 100%.
I can't give Civil War all that credit for that's the reason they're split up. I mean, they still could have got split up. I mean, they're not all going to friggin' wind up.
Well, look at the fact that at the beginning, when the Hulk came smashing down, Tony didn't call Iron Man.
Right.
No, sorry. Tony didn't call Captain America and say, come to New York, we need your help. But either way, doesn't matter. That's Civil War. Discussion for another day. I think the two other ones I have marked down here for bad character development, and we don't have to talk about them in depth because we already did, Black Widow and Shang-Chi, the two newest movies. I don't think they're good character development movies. I really don't. Because Black Widow served no purpose. It was a prequel for a character that's already dead. Doesn't make sense.
And our main issue, too, with it, something I knew we'd be talking about later, that's why I didn't mention it, but in Avengers Endgame, she stresses enough how the Avengers were her only family. And I'm just like, I don't even know. I'm not. All the details, but I don't know. Forget the director of Black Widow, but
Kate Herron.
Yeah, I'm like, I want to ask her if she's even seen all of the other movies Black Widow was in, to know her character is like, she's riding solo, man, until she meets the Avengers, and that's her family, and it's like. Steve.
But wait, you forgot about this one.
Right. Steve says it best at the end when, they realize she's not coming back. He's like, we were her only family.
That he knew of.
Right. But she said that, though. So it's not just like she said that countless times.
No, I understand.
And it's just like, oh, no, she has this other family that's not really her family, and we're never going to talk about them again.
Right.
Or they're going to be no help following Civil War. They're going to be no help following the Avengers. Then there's 3 and 4.
I'm poking fun a little bit, of course, because you know how I feel about that movie.
I think, in a weird way, it's like you didn't freaking need a Black Widow movie to have delve more into her character development.
Like I said, prequel for a character that's already dead doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But you know, if we can, you know, we can always come back to this question. But I think we've made some decent talking points, and I guess we just want to bring it back to the original question of, you know, did Marvel Studios ruin superhero movies? Personally, I don't really think so. I think what happened is you can't put all the blame on them. Because obviously they found a formula that works. They're using that formula. It makes them money. I think what affects the superhero film genre in and of itself, which I would argue that it is a definitive genre. I know there are discussions going on in the filmic world that says, you know, superhero movies are a subgenre. No, that's a genre. That's fully impacted. But regardless, I think part of the problem is that, like I said earlier, people have become conditioned to sort of expect certain things from superhero movies now, solely because Marvel has been the most prominent figure in the game. Even look at, for example, Hellboy from, I think, 2019 with David Harbour as the title character. The movie wasn't the best. It really wasn't good. David Harbour did his best, but the script is a comedy. It's a comedy script, and I think that's part of the influence of Marvel on superhero films, and even anti-hero films, villain films. You know, back in the day, if someone told anybody that they were making a Joker movie, you'd say, what? No, they're not making a Joker. How can they make a Joker movie without a Batman movie, right? Nowadays, it's just to be expected. I mean, you get Joker, you get Deadpool, you get Venom now coming out in a couple weeks.
And again, you know, that's something, you know, you always talk about too, is how they're trying to, I guess, humanize villains and give villains origin stories, sympathize with villains, and try to, like, make them the good guys. It's like, they're villains for a reason. Like, you're not supposed to like them. You're supposed to, like, they're flawed, and, you know, they're supposed to be I guess, a overarching societal message of, like, what not to do, and, like, how they're, you know, they're in the wrong always. But again, that another topic for another day. But I don't think the MCU has ruined superhero movies. I don't. I think, like we talked about earlier, it's who they're marketing to. They can't just see, like, just because a couple movies didn't do well. I don't think it's because the you know, Batman vs Superman, Man of Steel, they lacked humor. Like, I don't think that's the case. I just think it's as simple as they're like, well, from DC's perspective, they're like, well, Marvel has this formula and it works, and whoever sees those movies most likely is gonna see our movies. That's our target market. That's our audience. That's who we are gonna be selling.
You
our
would think
product
they'd
to.
see both movies.
Yeah, so it's like that. This is all the formula they know. We gotta copy this and do this or else they're not gonna like it. Instead of being like, we're gonna have creative minds make good stories about, you know, great superheroes because
compelling characters.
Great, compelling character-driven stories. You know, I don't know about you, but I love the MCU. I love all the characters. I don't think I'd be in the minority with this take, but I love all the DC superheroes better than the MCU, like Marvel superheroes.
In general?
In general, yeah. I've always loved Superman, you know, Batman, Flash. It sucks that there aren't films on par to what the MCU did. And again, none of this discredits the MCU. Because, like you said, they have a formula. It works.
Clearly.
They make millions upon millions of dollars with all their movies. So they're clearly doing something right. But I just wish, you know, DC and Warner Brothers isn't, like, trying to copy their formula and make it into their own movies. Because you can just tell it doesn't work. You know, it doesn't. You can't have humor in a freaking Batman movie. His character is based off of an insane tragedy, watching his parents get killed. How can you have humor in that?
Oh, something's definitely bleeding.
Fucking
Get out of
stupid.
here.
Get that, yeah, that was just dumb.
Zack Snyder's Justice League. So much better.
Right.
And what you said, you think that, you know, Marvel movies are, and maybe I'm misinterpreting what you said, Marvel movies are on a different level than DC movies. Yeah, I think Marvel movies are a little bit lower than DC movies. Personally, I'm a little biased towards DC superheroes. A lot of people know that. I love Batman. He's been one of my favorites since day one. I love Superman. I love Wonder Woman. All of them. I think that just personally, and this kind of relates to the question of Marvel and the modern superhero movies. I think I'm not going to say Marvel doesn't understand superheroes. Again, I'm not the end-all, be-all on superhero knowledge. I know tons of people that know truckloads more than me on the topic, but I think that the DC Comics movies, specifically the Zack Snyder ones like Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, it really shows an exemplary talent towards examining characters and building narratives around characters, not fitting characters into narratives. I think it's a very slippery slope, but it's a very unique difference that needs to be thought about when making a film, specifically a superhero film, because you don't see a superhero film for the genre, you see it for the hero. You go see Iron Man because you want to see Iron Man. You don't want to see big action fights. If you want to see action, you go see a Michael Bay movie where he just throws explosions at the screen.
Those types of over-the-top movies.
So, personally to me, and this could change among any people. It could change in my own belief as the MCU goes on with the TV shows, because I think the TV shows are top-notch so far. I think the problem with superhero films today is that people's expectations of them they're so narrow-minded. They're so focused on the flashy, where something in maybe Man of Steel was, deep and meditative. I'm thinking specifically to when he climbs the mountain and sees the vision of his dead father.
I think the trend is, seriously, when you think about it, it's like screw having a character-driven plot if it's well shot, has some great choreographed fight scenes, and humor. It's like that's a trifecta. It's a win-win-win for people, and I just think, again, I think Marvel just gets a pass because of what they've built.
They've built a reputation on their name where people have no idea who Shang-Chi is or what he's about, but they'll go see it because Marvel slapped on it.
I don't think they're really that. They should be more critiqued as they are. I just think I don't know how to explain it, but I just think they get a pass.
I know what you mean.
It's like Shang-Chi at its first weekend had the highest. It was the highest rated film in the MCU on Rotten Tomatoes.
It's like 90% or something.
98.
No, a 98.
It went down a little, right. But it's like it was a 98, and I know you're different. You hate looking at Rotten Tomato film scores before.
Yeah, I hate Rotten Tomatoes.
But I sometimes get sucked into it just to sort of be like what I should expect.
Well, you also have to kind of consider that Shang-Chi was really the first Marvel movie to be fully released post-pandemic. Because Black Widow obviously had the simultaneous release on Disney+, so you can only imagine how much box office money it lost out on because of the Disney Plus $30 premium, whatever the hell it was. So Shang-Chi was the first time...
Scarlett Johansson was.
Yeah, we're not going to get into that. But you have to consider that Shang-Chi, people just really wanted to get out in the theater and see it, and that's why it had so much money. And maybe they had the rose-colored glasses on, First Marvel movie back since, with the exception of Black Widow, obviously, like I said, with first
I
Marvel
get what
movie
you're
back.
saying, but I don't know what that has to do with fairly critiquing a film.
I'm just saying the 98% on Rotten Tomatoes is people just being so excited to be back in the movie theaters that they just say, oh my god, this is the greatest movie I've ever seen. Fairly critiquing a movie, I 100% understand what you're saying. I totally agree with you. I think Marvel, they're becoming complacent because they're not being as critically reviewed as something like, again, a DC movie. Like, shoot me for bringing up DC again. But, a DC movie comes out and you hear people bring up, like, the smallest, most minuscule details of, like, well, that's not right, so that's a bad movie. But you put the same thing in a Marvel movie, and it's... Don't worry about it, it's a Marvel movie.
And I think you and I sort of love character-driven, dialogue kind of heavy films, and don't really care so much of glorifying unbelievable shots and, humor and stuff. And I just think... I can't explain it. Like, I'll have to get back to you on this, but I seriously, I think Marvel just gets a pass now, and it's like I'll be shocked, dude, if you see in the next, whatever, how many films they have in their slate, I doubt one of them will I doubt one of them will be below 60%. Seriously, on Rotten Tomatoes.
You're right.
I just, and it's just weird. Like I get it. Maybe they deserve it because they've had just an insane run of success. Critically acclaimed wise and box office wise. Mm-hmm. But it's like they just, and that's the other thing. It's like it begs the question. It's like are they like independent or are they all connected? And so it's like they're all one of the same, if that makes sense.
I get it.
I don't think I'm just thinking of because it's out right now. Like Cry Macho, I think gets looked at differently than how Shang-Chi gets looked at. Yeah. Going into it, critiquing it.
I haven't seen Cry Macho, but I totally understand what you're saying.
It just does. And I think that's just kind of dangerous because it's like you kind of mislead people. I don't know. Yeah, that's just something I've kind of thought just since we've been talking about this. I don't think their movies are fairly critiqued. If that makes sense.
I get it. So as we're winding down here, do you have any final thoughts to throw in here before I throw my hat in the ring?
No, not really. I just the question we started with. Like I said, I just don't think the MCU ruined superhero movies for me. I don't know who really thinks that. I haven't seen that a lot. Like again, I know Scorsese said that the MCU is not really cinema. A lot of he has some good points there. I don't think he's fully right, but clearly he has a different style of filmmaking than these other people. So, and again, everyone can have their opinions. It's not just because he says that he's right, and if you disagree with him, you're wrong. It's like...
Right, of course. Opinions are what makes conversations.
Yes, and I think that's what's just kind of lacking in general today, is just having conversation with people just to talk about your differences and trying to come to some type of common ground and understanding.
Right.
But yeah, I definitely don't think they've ruined superhero movies. I think it's, again, like I mentioned, DC seeing the success of Marvel and their formula and trying to copy and manipulate it, and it just clearly doesn't work. Mm-hmm. It really doesn't. I loved Man of Steel. I know it's your favorite movie, Batman vs Superman.
Yes, sir.
I liked that when I saw it, and that got just completely shit on. Liked Justice League, but could tell it was, clearly not succinct for obvious reasons. They literally just freaking completely got rid of Snyder's, view on it, and his whole
vision.
Movie, just vision, and kind of just completely got rid of his film. And it's just like still in those movies, it's like they had to throw in those humorous dialogue, and it just took away from the seriousness. And I like the difference between DC and Marvel movies. I know what to expect with Marvel, and I thought I knew what to expect with DC, but again, can kind of talk about that.
Things change. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I don't think Marvel ruined superhero movies. I think people's expectations changed, and that's a lot of the backlash you feel with any superhero movie that comes out that's not Marvel. It's always going to be compared to a Marvel movie just because they're the prominent figure. They're top dog. They're on the number one spot. I mean, the only final thoughts I have is I would want to finish off by saying, like, I don't hate Marvel. I love Marvel. I go to a comic book store almost every week. I buy Marvel comics. I read Marvel comics. So, I mean, if it sounds like I'm too harsh on this, and to an extent I know you too, if it sounds like I'm too harsh, it's because I love this medium, and I know the potential they have in the storytelling of seeing these fantastic movies, whether it be DC adaptations, Marvel adaptations, even some sort of Image or Vertigo adaptations. Like the first Hellboy was great, Watchmen was great, but again, conversation for another time. So I know the potential they have, and I know what can be achieved if they tap into that potential. And I think that Marvel is kind of the scapegoat here, because like I said, they're on top. They're what everyone thinks of when you say superhero movie. I think that in their top spot, they've just become complacent, and they're so high up in this top spot that no matter what other superhero films try to do, they'll always be grasping for that, no matter how complacent Marvel gets.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, how they've become complacent. I just think they've done the character-driven stuff, with Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, all of them, all those movies, the Avengers, and I just think now they're just in it for, the cool looking movies and shots and cool fight scenes, and just kind of, that's like, I guess visuals come first, plot, dialogue comes second. I think that's kind of seriously their new outlook on it, and it's.
Yeah, but that being said, I'm still excited for the Eternals, not for the narrative or the characters, the plot or whatever, but Chloe Zhao, the director, fantastic director. She did Nomadland this past year. She won Best Director. Nomadland won Best Picture. I'd question the Best Picture maybe a little bit, but as a director, Chloe Zhao is fantastic. Nomadland was a beautiful movie.
I'm excited for it too because it's clearly a different movie to what we're used to with Marvel. I think you could argue it's probably the first movie outside the MCU, if that makes sense. Like quite literally. I mean, they really
more
don't
or less,
have any connection to any of the Avengers. So yeah, I mean, it's something different, something new. I'm looking forward to it, and I don't have any set expectations with Marvel movies, really. I don't. I just go into them. I really, my expectations are trying to like them because they've just, I've freaking, I haven't been let down many times with, their slate of films, but, I just think they've kind of been on a downward trend. And hopefully with Spider-Man, I hope they kind of redeem themselves and kind of get back on track, and, we'll see what comes with that movie, but. Yeah.
If anyone can do it, Spider-Man can do it. So yeah, I think we're going to wrap it up. Did Marvel movies ruin superhero cinema? I hope not for you, because it certainly hasn't been for us. Thanks everyone for listening. Catch you in the next.